Welcome to the final video from members of the Nashville Symphony Viola section. Today we're featuring Melinda Whitley, who not only is one of the great players in our section, but who just finished helping lead the Nashville Symphony musicians through a difficult 18 months during the pandemic. Melinda, you were the chairperson of the Nashville Symphony Musicians Committee for 4 years. Tell us a little bit about the normal duties of the Musicians Committee, and then how the pandemic changed the work of the committee.
Okay. Well, normally the Orchestra Committee, and I'll call it the OC for short, is the liaison between musicians and management for any decision that needs to be made that affects the musicians, like enforcement of the contract, schedule changes, acting as advocates for each individual musician when needed, regardless of our own personal relationships with any musician, management, or even the music director. We're sort of the guardians of artistic procedures and contractual things like the audition and termination processes too. The OC is really an extension of the local union and afforded the protections for being such an advocate. Those protections are important as sometimes relationships are strained due to disagreements and contract violations, conflicts of any sort really, some that even proceed to formal grievances. Such protections have been fought for over many generations of symphonic musicians to afford us the stability and respect in the workplace we've all come to expect today. The power of musicians to advocate for themselves is a direct result of our unity and support of each other. Acting as a group gives us power we wouldn't otherwise have. During the pandemic, some orchestra managements did not act in the best interest of the musicians they employ. It's important for new orchestral musicians to understand that our employers and board of directors have different perspectives than we do. Those same people, staff and board members, believe strongly that they are acting in our best interests. But we must remember that their jobs are not to take care of us as people, like our teachers in school before we win our jobs, or like our families. This is a workplace, a nonprofit workplace, and sometimes employees in different positions within any company are in competition for resources in a way we are not taught about in music school. That situation is often compounded in a nonprofit workplace with more scarce resources. Sometimes employees in powerful positions are even incentivized to act in ways that might seem unbelievable to those who have not experienced such workplace dynamics in other fields. But any board of directors made up of successful corporate employees is familiar with such things. When faced with a situation like we had here in Nashville, a long work stoppage that included basically a season-long furlough, the Orchestra Committee had to learn some new skills and think in terms of creating a different alternative to what we were facing. The challenge was bringing our audience along with us in the short term and in the long term. It's not really in our best interest to destroy our employer. We need them to succeed, to have the career that we've built. Because isn't that the point? To build a rewarding career and have a meaningful life? We can't live like students forever, always waiting for the future to begin our real lives. We want the stability of an income, the chance to build a family and have a home, benefits like health insurance, and a pension to enable us to retire from a long, successful orchestral career. We deserve that kind of life while we continue to hone our skills. An orchestra improves and grows by playing together over time. Yes, the musicians will come and go, but the artistic traditions established by each orchestra are passed down and built upon by each generation in a relatively seamless fashion. To get back to your question, we were lucky during the pandemic and our furlough that our musicians were willing to pitch in and keep our artistic mission top of mind. We created our own concert series, and we were able to use that model as a springboard to create concerts in other places. We used the concerts to raise money for a relief fund in a way that was completely different than any other orchestra in the country. We put cash in the pockets of our musicians when it was most needed. We also built a framework of 10 committees of musicians, and essentially we became our own orchestra management during the furlough.
How important has our connection been with other orchestras around the country during the pandemic? And why is it important that we support the musicians from other orchestras during their difficult times?
Well, our connections to other orchestras around the country were literally lifelines for us as a group and for some of us as individuals during the pandemic, me especially. Personally, I reached out to musicians in many other orchestras that I'd never met before and was never turned away without a supportive conversation, even when no other help was available. Each member of the orchestra committee, and the whole orchestra really, contacted friends in other orchestras for ideas, and we brought them all back to our group. Not only did we receive help and support with the personal struggles of what we were doing, because it was hard, orchestras all over the country sent us money, and we put it into our financial aid fund and distributed it directly to our musicians. These other orchestras were not even responding to an ICSOM call to action, as would normally happen during a work stoppage. Every orchestra in the country was worried about how to manage the pandemic, yet we benefited in very tangible ways from the generosity of our colleagues in other orchestras. Now that we're back to work, we respond in kind. Personally, I've had conversations with several other orchestra committee members undergoing tough times in their respective orchestras, and I will always be there to pay back the kindness I was shown when I was in their shoes. I know other orchestra committee members here will do the same. ICSOM, the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, is a group within the structure of the AFM. For many years, it was referred to as a network of friends, and they provide important leadership and a network of professionals in the field that advocate for and respond to the needs of professional symphonic musicians.
How have orchestra musicians in Nashville and around the country risen to deal with the challenges of the pandemic?
Well, most orchestras around the country kept performing and serving their communities in whatever way they could. Streaming became a lifeline until studies were done that helped us all evaluate the safety on our stages. Most orchestras moved to performing in smaller groups, but not all orchestras have done well with the transitions. Some have suffered greatly and continue to pay the price of previous bad management decisions worsened by the pandemic. San Antonio is currently the worst of the worst, and my heart goes out to them. For now, I think the biggest thing we can do is to find even more ways to connect with our communities. Each community is different, so sometimes what works in one city doesn't work in another, but people are people and music is still music. We can always find ways to connect on a human level and meet people where they are. Our Lane Motor Museum video is a good example of that, using music. Our musicians have also volunteered at food banks, reading days in schools, and played for patients at hospitals. There are many ways to increase our efforts as members of our community, and the ideas are as varied as the musicians in orchestras all across the country. One of my favorite examples from this year was when the Lyric Opera in Chicago produced an opera in a parking garage for a drive-through audience. It's the most creative thing I've ever heard of. And the Pittsburgh Symphony has the most impressive food service project run by the musicians in an orchestra that I've ever seen.
You mentioned the San Antonio Symphony, which has special meaning for me because I played there for a long time. Can you tell us how we might support the great musicians in that orchestra?
Sure, I can guess based on what I know. They're in a really bad situation. They don't have health insurance right now. They're on strike. They're very busy people trying to figure it all out. We need to help them, and we need to listen to what they say they need. We can hire them to work in our own orchestras to help provide them some income. We can donate money to send to them. That's very important. We can share their social media posts and interact with them online. We can support them personally as their friends and let them vent. When you're in that sort of a position, you really need a place to vent that's really appropriate so that you then have the strength to go back and do what you need to do in your community. You can brainstorm with them when you're asked, but they have a lot of leadership and help in the professional world right now, and so we need to be there and listen to what they need.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that our training and experiences as violists contribute to our ability to deal with the challenges of the pandemic? And what experiences in your life helped you with leading us through the difficulties of the past 18 months?
Well, I do feel our training as violists contributes to our abilities to deal with the challenges of the pandemic and really with orchestra life in general. Our position is in the middle of the music, sometimes, in the middle of the stage, and it requires us to work while constantly changing our focus on what we need to match at any given moment. We have to pay attention to everyone else to do our job well. Frankly, I wish I could ignore other parts sometimes, but we're the middle child of the string section. Sometimes our job is to be the glue that binds everything together. I often think it's like being the ultimate assistant principal. We can make everything easier or harder. And when you have a viola section with as much talent as we do, we can shine on our own just as easily whenever we get the chance. It's super interesting to me that in our viola section, 8 out of the 10 of us have served on important committees during our tenure here. 3 of our current violists have been OC chairs during my time in the orchestra. And if you look back to previous members of the viola section, that percentage increases. I think there is something about the mindset and personality of a violist that lends itself to serving and advocating for our colleagues. I think it's because we have a unique perspective. And we're all a little bit hungry to be heard more too, and wish we could affect the outcomes of issues a little more often. Committee life, I will say, gives you that opportunity to affect outcomes in a different way, a more direct way than we often can affect things on the stage. It's also very interesting to me that even the chair of ICSOM, Meredith Snow, is a violist in the LA Phil. And I believe she's in her 5th season as chair of ICSOM. I think it's also interesting that a lot of ICSOM delegates are violists, and if you go to the conference, you'll get to see a lot of your friends. I'm not sure there's an easy answer to the more personal part of your question. Life happens to all of us, and I've personally had a rough couple of years. I think I needed to bury myself in a good cause to survive it, and I'm trying to use my committee experiences now by going back to school to learn some new things. And I don't know yet where that's going to take me, but it's pretty exciting.
Well, thank you, Melinda, for this informative video. And to all of our American Viola Society colleagues, happy holidays.